All right, I think it's time. Welcome back. Thanks for coming back. Usually on Friday we have a quiz, but not this time because the quiz always covers what was on the homework, and we haven't had a homework yet. Depending on how far we get today, we may or may not have a homework to do this weekend, just because we haven't done a lot of new material yet. But we'll see how that goes. I want to talk some more about voting. I have looked at your votes that you did from last time about the greatest movie series ever, and I have the results for that to share with you in a little bit. That's all something to look forward to. Welcome back. I want to talk some more about voting then. So last time we talked sort of in generalities. Here's just a fun quick little example. Remember, we were talking about voting systems in which the voters rank their choices. That's what we did for the votes last time. And the way that we write down the results of those are something like, this is just a made up example. Usually our options that people are voting on, I'm just going to call like A, B, C, D, just because that's easier than making up a scenario in some kind of abstract example. I'm going to call them like this. When you do one of these ranked elections where everybody ranks their choices, the results just look something like that, right? You say this, when I write these results here, what these columns mean, remember, is this means 25 people said A first and then B and then C. 37 people said B and then A and then C. 38 people said A and then C and then B. And apparently nobody said any of the other options. There are actually other things that people could have said in this case. Like you could have said B and then C and then A, but apparently nobody said that in this particular election. All right? And then how do you decide who the winner is in an election like this? Well, I was trying to convince you last time that there isn't really an obvious way to decide who the winner is. There are a few different ways that you could think of just off the top of your head to do it. And there's probably other ways that you wouldn't necessarily think of, maybe more complicated ways to do it. I would say, like in this example, though, it seems to me, I don't know if you agree with me, if you look at these preferences closely, it looks to me like the people like A pretty well here, right? A is on top 25 times here and 38 times here. And then these people, they don't like A the best, but they like A second best at least. Like certainly it looks like A is better than C in this case. Welcome. This is math.
Yeah.
All right. It absolutely looks to me like A is better than C in the opinion of, actually, if you look at this, every person across everybody, they all like A better than C, right? So I'm going to say just kind of informally here, looks like maybe A should win, although that's not exactly because I calculated it. I mean, just like informally speaking, looking at the votes, it looks like these people, they like A a lot, right? The middle column, A is second best, but not worse, at least. But sometimes, in some examples, it's very hard to say, here it looks like A should win. I want to give you an example where sometimes it's hard to say. For example, this is just a simple case. Let's say there are 9 voters, and 3 of them say A, then B, then C. 3 of them say B, then C, then A. And 3 of them say C, A, B. All right? Let's just imagine that that's how the people feel about these 3 candidates. Can you see the screens all right, by the way? We can close the shades if it's too glary. No? This is a very interesting example. I don't know if this looks interesting on the surface. I would like to look at who do you think should win in this case in some kind of informal way. Well, actually, it looks to me like this is kind of a tie. It looks sort of like a 3-way tie. So A, B, and C are all getting 3 votes in the top position. Actually, they're also all getting 3 votes in the middle position and in the last position. They're sort of like, I'm going to say this looks like a 3-way tie. a three-way tie is not all that weird, but actually there is something kind of deeply weird about these preferences here. And you will see weird things if you consider, let's consider pairs of candidates. Like there are a lot of ways you could try to analyze the preferences of the people in this example or another example like it. One way is to look at, just like I did say up here, I noticed by looking carefully that actually everybody likes A better than C, right? So I'm going to try and look at similar things like that. If I only look at, say, A's and B's, then how do the people feel about, if it was just A versus B, how would they feel? Actually, in that case, it's not a tie. You can see, if I only look at A's and B's, here the first three people like A better than B. The second three people like B better than A. There's a C in the middle, but I'm just talking about A's and B's. And the last three people like A better than B. So actually, that would be 6 people like A better than B. That's these 3 and also these 3. And then only 3 people like B better than A. So if we look at closely here, if I'm looking at, say, A versus B, what I see here is 6 prefer A and 3 prefer B. Right? You have to look kind of carefully at the chart, but I mean, I hope that you agree. In the first column, I have 3 people who like A better than B, and in the last column, I have another 3 people who like A better than B. So that's why I said 6 people prefer A over B, whereas only 3 prefer B better than A. That's the 3 in the middle, right? The B is on top of the A here. There's also a C in there, but for now, I'm ignoring the C, all right? Any questions about that? I hope you can see where I got the 6 and the 3. And now, I can try to just do the same thing for the other ways you could pair them up. That was A versus B. Let's talk about A versus C. So this will involve looking in the chart and just temporarily ignoring the B's and compare only the A's and the C's. What do we get? I see the first column has A above the C, but the other 2 have C's above A's. All right. So in this case, it's also sort of a 6 and 3 thing. 6 prefer C, and 3 prefer A, right? And then there's one other way that you could consider pairs here. How about B versus C, right? That's the other pairing that we could consider in B versus C. Again, I look at the chart here, only looking at the B's and the C's and ignoring the A's. I see B is on top here, and C is on top in the last column. So that would be 6 people like B better, 6 prefer B, and 3 prefer C, right? All right, sometimes this kind of analysis can help you to sort of deduce if one candidate is better than another, that kind of a thing. Can we, kind of summarizing these 3 lines there, can we say anything about how these people feel in general? The first one here says basically that they like A better than B, right? So I will say in general. This is interesting because on the surface it looked like a 3-way tie, but actually you can see here the people, they do like A better than B in general, right? In general, they prefer A over B. So maybe it's not so much of a tie. I don't know. And then actually you can, so that came from the first line. If I look at the last line here, it says they like B better than C, right? Because 6 of them prefer B versus 3 for C. Okay, so, and they prefer B over C, right? And then what about the middle line, A versus C? It says 6 prefer C and 3 prefer A. So, and they prefer C over A, right? Something just fell on me. All right. So the people in general, they like A better than B, they like B better than C, they like C better than A. Does that sound interesting to anybody? If you really think about it, this should strike you as kind of it's kind of bogus, right? That's kind of nonsensical. That the people in general, they like A better than B. So this is kind of like, it's kind of like saying A is greater than B, and B is greater than C, and C is greater than A. It's that last one that doesn't make any sense given the other two, right? I will say this is nonsensical. All right. Yet another reason why I hope you're beginning to agree with me that voting is more complicated than it seems to be on the surface. Here's an example where a bunch of people have expressed opinions which, when you consider them all together, don't really make any sense. Because this kind of a thing here, it doesn't make sense to say A is better than B, and B is better than C, and C is better than A. Right? That's like a circular kind of nonsense. There's a name for this. Actually, this phenomenon has been known for a long time. This is referred to as the Condorcet paradox. Condorcet, this is a name of a person. This is like a French mathematician, sort of politician. I don't know if he was actually a politician, but he was interested in mathematics and political science, politics. This was like in I believe the 1700s, Condorcet. This is a long time ago. That Condorcet was one of the first people to really investigate the idea of voting in some sort of formal mathematical way. The Condorcet paradox, it says, what it says basically is, can I say, I didn't mean to say that. I'm going to use a fancy mathematical word here. It is transitive. This is a word that you probably learned in your youth as a student of math. I think they teach kids this word. Does anybody remember the transitivity property? This is something maybe you remember the word. I don't expect you to actually remember, but anybody happen to remember? The transitive property. It's sometimes this is a property of the equal sign that people say. It's when I write it using the equal sign, it is if A equal B and B equals C, then A equals C. This is the transitive property of the equal sign. The transitive property is also satisfied by the inequalities, or if A is greater than B and B is greater than C, then A is greater than C. These are the transitive property. This is just a basic property of the equal sign and also of the greater than or less than sign. They all have this transitivity property. All right, and it is a fact that ordinary people, in their preferences, individual preferences, are transitive. What I mean by that is, if you just think about, like you personally, how you feel about different options, if you like option A better than B, and you also like B better than C, that automatically means that you like A better than C. Did that make sense what I just said? It's like if I like, I don't know, on my pizza, if I like pepperoni better than plain, not writing so well. And I also like plain better than anchovy, which is true. This is all true, by the way. Then you may deduce automatically that I like pepperoni better than anchovy, because that's just that's like part of what the word better means. That if you like one thing better than another, and another better than another, then the first thing is better than the last thing. Yeah. The bathrooms are right along that wall, I think. Right over there. Yes.
Thank you.
They're not far.
Okay, thank
I thought she was going to ask about anchovies.
No, sorry, I don't like them.
I don't either. All right, so I'm just going to write what I was saying here. If I like pepperoni better than plain and plain better than anchovy, then automatically, just like logically speaking, then I must like pepperoni better than anchovy. All right? And if somebody asks me to explain, I think this is a clear idea to everybody, but if someone asks me to explain why exactly is that, I would say because human being preferences are transitive. That's the mathematical word for that. If the one thing is better than another thing, and the other thing is better than another thing, then the first thing is better than the last thing. Okay? So, individual preferences are transitive. All right? This is something that everybody knows on a basic level. But Condorcet's paradox is, and this is what Condorcet realized, individual preferences are transitive. But group preferences are not transitive, at least not always. Group preferences are not always transitive. Like in the example that I just said, where it looked like a three-way tie on the surface, but if you look at the pairs and compare them in pairs, I'll just say e.g., for a group, it's possible to have A is better than B, and B is better than C, and C is better than A. This is not transitive, and it doesn't make sense for an individual to believe that, but sometimes it can happen that group preferences do behave in this way, all right? Just a very simple way of saying what Condorcet's paradox is, if your friends at lunch ask you, what did you guys talk about today? You say, we talk about Condorcet's paradox. Oh, what is that? Here's the very simple answer is group preferences are not guaranteed to make any logical sense. Right? You can more or less count on individual people to have some kind of logical consistency in their minds. But when you try to combine groups of preferences together, there is no expectation that it's going to make any sense when you try to put it all together. All right? And this is really a fundamental kind of chink in the armor of the concept of democracy. Like I said last time, I'm not a democracy skeptic. I do believe that democracy is the way to build societies. But if there is no such thing as group preferences in any kind of logically coherent way, then you really want to build your civilization on something which doesn't even make any logical sense? I suppose the answer is yes, but only because there aren't any better alternatives. So group preferences are not guaranteed to make logical sense. All right, so here's sort of the big questions that we're going to be trying to think about over the next couple weeks. First of all, how can we judge? Actually, this is going to be my second question. Sorry. I want to ask first, can we create voting methods which make sense as much as possible? Right? Given that group preferences don't always make sense, that sort of means that you're not always going to get sensible results when you vote, because no matter what you do, you're going to have to choose a winner, and that may reflect something that doesn't make a lot of logical sense. But hopefully you can choose the winner in some way that is like more or less pretty good most of the time. That's the best you can do, kind of. So can we create voting methods which make sense as much as possible? And then kind of the question that follows after that is, how can we judge if a voting method is working sensibly? Right? This is maybe a deeper mathematical question. If I propose to you, hey, why don't we, like I was sort of brainstorming about how could you figure out the results of elections like this where people rank choices. Somebody said, why don't you like add up a bunch of points or something, which sounds like a fine idea. Although the question you should have in your mind, how exactly can you tell if that's a good idea or not? I mean, maybe that's a terrible idea for some reason. I don't know. It doesn't sound like a terrible idea to me, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's a good idea. How could we mathematically kind of judge a particular voting system and say, yeah, actually that sounds pretty good. That would probably work well. Or maybe there's some way that you can tell that's a bad idea. This is a big question. And there are actually several different ways that you can try to judge how good a voting system is. And we're gonna talk about a few different ways like that. All right? This is sort of where we're going. Any thoughts about this so far? I hope you're all with me on this stuff here. All right, let's try and talk specifically. That was a little kind of political philosophy. Not really political, I don't know. About human nature. If we have enough time, it's my goal today to talk about two different methods for deciding elections like this, in which people rank their choices. And the first one is very simple. It's called the plurality system. This is our first voting method that we're going to talk about in particular. If I give you a bunch of rankings that a bunch of people said when they voted, how do you decide who the winner is? There are many different ways to do it. The sort of simplest one that we're going to talk about is called the plurality system. So in a plurality election, this is the one, we talked about this last time, this is the one in which you only consider the first place rankings and you just choose the winner based on that. You ignore all the others. So the one with the most first place rankings is the winner. This is called the plurality system, all right? That certainly is one way in which you can do it. This is kind of a very simple way, and you ignore a lot of the data. You ignore everyone else's like second and third choice. So you should feel like this is maybe not a great way, but certainly you could do it that way. So, for example, this would be like a typical easy homework assignment. I give you an election here. Let's say 25 people said A, then B, then C. 37 people said A, then C, then B. And 12 people said B, then C, then A. And your job is find the winner. Using the plurality system, I might just say, using plurality, all right? Eventually we're going to talk about several different systems that you could use. The simplest is plurality. How do you do it? You count up how many times each candidate is ranked in the first position. So this involves looking at the letters here, and also these numbers. You have to take the numbers into account, of course. Remember, this number 25 means 25 people put A first, then B, then C. 37 put A first, then C, then B, etc. So I just add up. How many points did each one get in the top position? They're not really points, just how many times is A appearing in the top position? I see 25 here, and then 37 more here. So you got to add 25 and 37. by the way, as far as what I would expect you to add together, say on a quiz or on a test, this is about the limit of what I would want you. I would expect you to be able to do that without a calculator. If you mess it up, no big deal. I am likely to mess this up when I do things like this. 62, right? I'm a good mathematician. I'm not a good adder and multiplier. If you go out to dinner with me, don't ask me to calculate the tip. I will probably mess it up. What about B? What do you think? 12, yeah. B is on top here, 12 people, and nowhere else, so you don't really have to add anything together. It's just 12. And C? 0. Yeah, nobody put C in the top position. And so A wins. Exclamation. Right? 62 being the greatest. Yes?
Would this be like the most similar to what we do when we're voting? We only consider
Yeah. This is basically how we do elections in the United States. Because now, when we vote, we don't typically rank our choices. But that's because in our system, all they care about is counting the first choice. And so they don't even ask you what your other choices are, because it doesn't matter. Yeah, the plurality system is basically what is used in the United States, and not only in the United States, in most political elections. I will just say that. Plurality is how most political elections work, just all over the whole world. And in particular, in the United States, we use plurality basically for most things. All right. To elect the president, it's basically plurality, but then we also have the Electoral College, which is an extra overlay of complication. But state by state, it goes by plurality. All right. Great. Let's. I thought this might be a fun time to hand out. I'm going to do this. My kid has been home all week with COVID. That's why I'm wearing my mask. But
How's he doing?
fine. She never really got very sick, and I'm almost certain that nobody else got it. So these are my results as I counted up. This took me a while, but I read through all of your votes and I tabulated them in this table. Everybody got one? All right. So I have one in here actually. Okay, these are the results. I actually, maybe it's not appropriate for me to use the word results. There we go. I haven't told you the winner. What's going on here? I just sort of, I read through all your votes and I wrote them all down. And this is how you all voted. How do we choose the winner? Well, as usual, there are several ways to do it, but since we know of the plurality system, let's decide the winner using the plurality system. Please keep this paper. We're going to come back to this every so often because, like I said, we're going to learn other methods for deciding elections. So this will be our first time visiting this. Something's weird with my screen here. All right, so let's do the plurality. So in the chart there, H means Harry Potter, L means Lord of the Rings, S means Star Wars, and T means 10 Things I Hate About You. I meant to look that up, actually. Does the official name of the movie have the number 10 in it, or the word 10? It's the actual number? All right. I changed it to a T. So all we got to do is count up for each of these 4 options. How many times each one appears in the top position. Remember, you have to take into account the numbers as well as the columns. I was trying to be helpful. I put the columns in more or less alphabetical order. So, how many votes in the top position does H get? What do you say? Looks like 7 to me. This would be, in particular, 1 plus 4 plus 2, right? I'm adding up how many times the H occurs in the top position. That is 7. All right, this is not hard to do. I hope you feel that way. Yes.
So on the numbers at the top, what exactly does that mean? 1, 4, 2?
Yeah. So this one means one person said Harry Potter first, then Lord of the Rings, then Star Wars, then 10 things. The next column, 4, means 4 people said HSTL. So I had to look. This took me a while to make this chart. I had to look through all of your votes, which is about 30 of them. I wrote them all down, and then I realized that like 4 different people said the same thing here. 4 people said Harry Potter, and then Star Wars, and then etc. Right? Okay, let's look at the other numbers then. So the L, only 2 people put Lord of the Rings on top, right? Those 2 columns here with 1s on the top. So this is a 1 and a 1, which is 2. The S, it looks like this one was pretty popular in the top position. 5 and 1 and 6 and 1, that's 13. 5 plus 1. I'm just writing this out for complete clarity. If you were doing this, I said this would be a typical easy homework question. If you're doing this on the homework, you don't really need to write those little pluses in there if you don't want to. And then the T's, I see all of these here. A 1, a 1, a 1, and 2 2s. So that would be 1 and 1 and 1 and 2 and 2. Yeah, that's 7. All right? And so, using the plurality system, Star Wars wins. All right? Yes?
With this system, were you only ever saying what came in first? You never mentioned.
That's right. Yeah, nothing else is taken into account at all. So, like, it may mean, I mean, I haven't looked too closely at the chart here, but like if this was somehow an important election in the real world, it may be the case that there is some reason that maybe the H is actually preferred more than the Star Wars. All this means is that Star Wars has most often been put in the top position. It doesn't necessarily mean much more than that. All right. I would like to point out just a little technical matter. Oh, actually, sorry. Let's do one more example, and that is I would like to do this on this example that I handed out last time. I hope that you brought this paper back, but I told you to bring it back. If not, I have a few extras. I'm going to put it up on the screen also. Anybody want one of these? This paper we will be revisiting a few more times, so please bring it back. Anybody else? Anymore? I'm going to put it up here anyway. It's not a big deal. So you should be looking just at that little chart on the bottom. All the stuff, the chart on the bottom is a summary of all the stuff further up. And we more or less did this last time, but let's decide the winner of this election using the plurality system. All right? I do the same thing. I count up. How many votes does A get in the top position? B, C, and D. All right, A is in the top on the first column only. That's 14. So A has 14 votes. B is on the top. I see 4 times, right? There's only one column which has B on top. And there were 4 voters in that column. So B is on top 4 times. How about C? Looks like 11 to me. I see C is here with 10 and then also getting 1 from the last column. So C gets 11 votes in the top position. And D appears in the top position here 8 times. So that would be 8. And so A is the winner. All right? Using the plurality system. It is always important to know which system you're using. That determines, I mean, it could be a different winner if we use some other way of counting up the votes. All right? So A is the winner using the plurality system. Something which I would like to point out. Notice here, A got 14 out of 37 votes, right? Some dapper gentlemen walking by. Candidate A got 14 out of 37 possible votes. That actually is, you do the math, that's less than half, right? Half of 37 is, I don't know, I shouldn't begin sentences like that when people are walking by. It's 15, 17, 18 would be, is that half? 18 would be half of 36, so 18 and a half, right? Anyway, 14 is less than half of that. But if you're using a plurality system, you can win even if you get less than half of the votes, right? And actually, that is often true in, for instance, our presidential elections, because there's a bunch of people who vote for people who are not really serious contenders, and oftentimes the winner ends up with fewer than 50% of the vote. Anyway, this is a little bit of terminology here. Go back to my main notes. Just so you get it straight, plurality means it means that somebody gets more votes than anybody else. This is different from majority. Sometimes people use the word majority to indicate the winner, but in a mathematical context, the word majority means more than 50%. And like I just said, it is possible to win a plurality election even if you didn't get more than 50%. So plurality means more votes than anybody else. Majority means more than 50%. So those two words, sometimes when people are being sloppy, they use them as synonyms, but they're not. And in this class, it's important to understand the difference. Plurality means you get more votes than anybody else got. Majority means you actually got more than 50% of the votes. All right, that's just a simple bit of terminology. And the reason it's important, not every plurality winner actually gets a majority. All right? And this happens all the time in our presidential elections or whatever. Because of the Electoral College, actually, you can get less than the other guy and still win. But even if you consider, say, state by state or something like that, you win the election not because you got a majority of the votes. You win because you got more than the other guy got, which sometimes a majority would certainly do it, but sometimes you can do that without having a majority. All right, great. Plurality is a simple system. It's easy enough to do, but often it gets weird results. So plurality often achieves weird results. So what I want to talk about is a specific example in American history, fairly recent history, where the election used the plurality system, but because of the plurality system, we got a result which is a little counterintuitive. I am speaking of the presidential election, Bush versus Gore. I know you probably don't remember this the way that I do. This was in the year 2000. Gore was the vice president of Bill Clinton. And since then, Al Gore has become sort of an environmental activist. That's what he's mostly does these days. I get that sense. Running against George W. Bush, who won, and then also Bush won, the next time around also. Very important election, I think. This election happened right before 9/11, and I think it's safe to say that Bush and Gore. Gore's response to 9/11, I think, would have been very different from Bush's. So it made a big difference that Bush won this time around. Bush is the Republican, Gore is the Democrat. Bush eventually won, but I'm going to tell you about how the votes went. There was another candidate on the ballot, which usually is the case in presidential elections. I don't know if you've ever voted for president, but usually you have like the two options, the Republican and the Democrat, and then there's maybe like 3 or 4 other people that you've never heard of that basically nobody's going to vote for, but they're on the ballot. There are some outsider political parties. Those other folks are never going to win, but you know, it's a free country, so you can run for president if you want to, and if you have enough supporters, you can get your name on the ballot. Anyway, another candidate was Ralph Nader. This guy knows what I'm talking about. I like saying this guy knows what I'm talking about. Ralph Nader, and he was a member of. Do you remember his party? The Green Party, yeah. The Green Party is kind of an outsider party that this is on the very sort of one way that people talk about American politics on a very simple level is about liberals and conservatives. The left and the right. The left is the liberals, the right is the conservative. The Democrats are the liberals and the Republicans are the conservative. If you want to think of everything in this kind of one-dimensional way, which is a little oversimplified, the Green Party in general is kind of like super liberal. They are lefter than the Democrats. All right. So what we have here, if you think of sort of a scale of, liberal and conservative, what we have is like Bush is far to the right. Actually, by today's standards, Bush would be regarded as not so far to the right. But for the purposes of what we're talking about here, Gore is on the left, and Nader is even further on the left. All right. This is very simply a very simplistic way of thinking about how these guys and their various ideas go. And I said last time I'm not going to try to talk a lot about politics. I'm talking about politics now, but I'm not saying anything controversial. If I ever say something controversial, then I will let you know. This is my own personal opinion. But this is how everybody thought of these 3 guys at the time. Because of the Electoral College, the way you become the president in the United States is you have to win a bunch of states, and each state that you win gives you a certain number of points, and then you add up all those points, and that determines who wins. It's not determined by how many votes you get, per se. It's determined by the Electoral College points. And the way that this election went, all the states had been decided except for the state of Florida. And the voting in the state of Florida was too close to call immediately after the election. But all of the other states were arranged such that it turned out that whoever was going to win in Florida would become the president. So everybody was focused specifically on the votes in Florida. So the votes in Florida would decide the election. Because when they added up all the other states, it was all, it wasn't a tie, but it was within close enough so that whoever won Florida would swing it one way or the other. And I'm going to tell you, these are the real vote counts in Florida. You will be amazed. Bush got, this is the actual official number, if you look this up, 2,912,790 votes. And Gore got, you ready for this? 2,912,253 votes. This is an absurdly close race here in Florida. That difference there of about 500 votes is actually, that's quite a bit less than the natural margin of error. When people are counting this many votes, you would expect them to mess it up by at least 500. So this is by no means a conclusive result, but you gotta decide the election somehow. They're not gonna redo the election or something because it's so close. There were several ridiculous lawsuits. I don't mean ridiculous as in they shouldn't have happened, but ridiculous so at this time the voting was not done on computers. It was done on paper. but it's not like a Scantron where you fill in the bubble. It is that way some places, but in Florida, it was a kind of like a Scantron, but you actually punch a little hole in the paper, and the paper is like has these little perforations, and you stick your little thing into the dotted box, and it pokes a piece of paper out, and then that's how you indicate your vote. And there were these crazy lawsuits about like the little bit of paper that you poke out. That's called a chad. And there were lawsuits about the people counting the votes. One thing that they disagreed about was if the person poked the chad, but the chad didn't fully detach from the paper, like it was still hanging there, that's called a hanging chad. And they realized that if we count the hanging chads, then maybe Bush will win. But if we say those are illegal because it wasn't a valid vote, because you didn't poke the chad, then the other guy's going to win. Like, do we count the hanging chads became like a big political issue that the Democrat, I don't remember which way it went, but it was like the Democrats say, yes, we must count the hanging chads. And the Republicans said, no, we cannot count the hanging chads. And then there was another one. I think eventually they decided we will count the hanging chads, but then there were some which they called the dimpled chads, where you could tell that somebody was pushing on it, but they didn't actually push it all the way through. And so it wasn't even hanging, it was just like, they were sometimes called pregnant chads. It was just like sticking out a little bit, but not pushed through. This was another like hot political issue. And anyway, there were lawsuits about this. Eventually, it was decided by the Supreme Court that this would be the official count. So what I'm showing you here, after making decisions about the chads or whatever, this is the numbers that they eventually came up with. This was very unsatisfying to everybody, and of course the Gore people were really upset by this, because basically the Supreme Court decided who the winner of the election was. And it may not surprise you to know that at that time, the Supreme Court had a majority of Republican-appointed justices on the court, and so they basically, and everyone on the Supreme Court, in this case, voted in line with the party that appointed them to the court. So basically, the Supreme Court was making what is essentially the most important political decision that was to be made at the time, which is not supposed to, like that's not the way it should go. Although I'm not saying I have a better idea of what they should have done. They have to do something, and it's not clear what they should have done. But anyway, that was a ridiculous time. I didn't tell you though, Nader, the radical left, Nader got this many votes, 97,000. Can you believe it? 97,421 votes went to Ralph Nader, all right? It is not an understatement to say the Democrats were very angry with Nader. Why is that? It's because if you think about how these three guys sort of fit into the political spectrum, we can assume basically everybody who voted for Nader, they would have preferred Gore rather than Bush. Bush is like way far away from Nader, all right? And Gore, the Nader voters at least, would have viewed Gore as some kind of middle ground compromise sort of a thing. But just because in America you only allowed to say who your first choice is, so they put Nader, and the fact that they put Nader, so these Naders were blamed.
If I may say, for the record,
Yeah.
Gore could have won his home state, but he didn't. He didn't win his home state.
All right.
So
Yeah.
I think that says something in itself.
Right, there is something to be said about the focus on Florida is kind of a red herring in some ways, because there were many other states. I mean, I could say, well, Gore could have won if he had only won Texas. If Gore won Texas, he wouldn't have needed to win Florida. There are many other considerations, but I think because of the way it went down, where Florida was too close to call, and it was a major like media churn for the next month or so when they figured it all out. Anyway, the Naders were blamed for making Gore lose, right? I would like to try to think of this particular election in terms of people's preferences. Now, we can't really say with total certainty how these people would have preferred if they were allowed to rank, but if these voters ranked their choices, what might they have said? And again, this is speculation to some extent, but everything I'm about to say was something that people were talking about back then. This is not controversial, what I'm saying at this point. If these voters ranked their choices, it probably would look like something like this. All those people who voted for Bush, that is 2,912,790, they voted for Bush on the ballot. What do you think? If I had asked them instead to rank their choices, what do you think they would have said?
The Bush voters?
Yeah. They would have put Bush first, obviously, because they did. Yeah, probably Bush and then Gore and then Nader, because Nader was way, way outside in their opinion. So these voters probably would have said Bush, then Gore, then Nader. Now, what's the other alternative? Bush, then Nader, then Gore? I suppose it's possible some of those people liked Nader better than Gore, but they put Bush on top. That's a weird preference, but I'm going to say it's likely that they all would have said that. And then, what about the people who put Gore on top? The people who put Gore on top, actually, this is much harder to say. The Gore voters, according to this sort of like spectrum, they were right in the middle. And really, it's not possible to know if they would have liked Bush better in the second place or Nader. I'm going to be very favorable to Bush, and let's assume that all of those people who put Gore on their ballot, they like Bush better than Nader. This is by no means true. So this is very generous to Bush, right? Probably this is not accurate, but I'm being as generous as possible to Bush here. Bush, of course, was the eventual winner. And then the Nader voters, 97,421. For similar reasons, we can assume that their preference would have been like this: Nader, then Gore, then Bush. That's because Nader was the leftmost outsider. Those Nader voters probably really didn't like Bush. All right? And now I would like to look at this election. So using the plurality system here, which is what actually happened in the real world, Bush wins, right? Because if you write down the totals, Bush gets 2,912,790. Gore gets 2,912,000. What? I wrote the same number twice.
Yep.
Sorry, this should be 253, this one. Sorry about that. And Nader, of course, gets chump change. All right? Bush is the winner, because that's more in the plurality system. But if you look at these in terms of like pairs, how they prefer, you will notice that, like, look here and compare Bush versus Gore, which are really the only relevant candidates in terms of people who have a realistic chance of winning. If I compare Bush versus Gore here, if we compare Bush versus Gore, ignoring the Nader preferences, but just compare Bush versus Gore, what you see here is, sorry, I'm going to have to scroll. Maybe can I shrink it? Yeah. Keep that on the screen. If we compare just Bush versus Gore, Bush is preferred by, just in the first column, right? Those are the only people who like Bush better than Gore. That would be 2,912,790. Gore is preferred by how many? The other two columns added together, which is actually more, right? That's quite a bit more. 2,912,253 plus the other one, 97,421. I added this together ahead of time. This is 3,009,674. All right. So if you only consider Bush and Gore, which, let's be honest, that's all who really mattered in this election. At least that's who was supposed to matter. Gore would have won this election if Nader wasn't in there. All right. Can I say it this way? A majority of voters preferred Gore over Bush. But Bush won. All right? The Gore people were very upset about this. And what are you going to do but sort of shake your fists? This is the weird kind of thing that can happen when you use the plurality system. Like, I think, seen in its proper, you can shake your fists all you want. Who is really to blame for this? You can blame the Nader voters because they should have voted for Gore instead. But I don't really fault somebody for voting for who they want. I mean, people should vote for who they want, right? In some sense.
Do you want a little antidote on this?
Sure.
When George Bush was approached by someone with this theory.
Yeah.
Okay? And it was at the first 4th of July picnic. And his response was, his quote was, "Who cares what you think?" That was his classic quote.
Okay.
You know, he's been quoted on that for years because it was just an individual giving his opinion.
Right.
Therefore, he thought, "Who cares what you think?"
Yeah, right.
Anyway, just thought
Yeah,
I'd share that.
I haven't heard that quote
Yeah.
before. I know this was something that everybody basically was talking about at the time. And like I said before, what I'm saying here is not controversial. Pretty much everyone accepts that this is how it went down. Nader even wrote a book about it called "Crashing the Party." There's a reference to the fact that he wrecked Gore's campaign just by being on there. And before the election, Gore had went to Nader and said, "Hey, Nader, would you like do me a solid and just take yourself off the ballot so that I can win?" And Nader wouldn't do it, even though obviously Nader had no hope of winning the election. It was the principle of it or something. Anyway, I'm just going to say we should, maybe this is my own personal opinion, as a mathematician, we should blame the system. I feel like a Marxist or something. It's the system, man. It's keeping us down. The problem is the plurality system. Like, this was not some kind of conspiracy to make the Republican win or to prevent the Democrat from winning, although the Supreme Court, maybe they had less than honest motives in their decision making. But really, the whole scenario is caused by the fact that we use the plurality system. And this is exactly the kind of scenario which is meant to be avoided by using some other kind of system. All right? So plurality is to blame for this sort of thing. This is not the only time that this sort of thing has happened. There was an election, actually the election that Bill Clinton won. There was a third-party candidate in that one. It was George Bush, the older, George H.W. Bush, versus Bill Clinton. And there was another guy, Ross Perot, who was kind of he was an outsider, but on the other side, on the Republican side. And as it turned out in that election, many voters voted for Ross Perot rather than Bush. And this is a little more controversial, but there are many who theorize that this is what allowed Clinton to win, because Perot screwed Bush in that election, just in the same way that Nader screwed Gore in this one. So it's not, this is not a Democrat versus Republican issue. It's really an issue of the system itself. And this is why people are interested in other kinds of systems. All right, anything else to say about that? It's an interesting story. In our remaining 15 minutes, I want to talk about another system that we could use rather than plurality. And this other system is actually coming into prominence and is being increasingly used around the world and even in some parts of the United States. It's called ranked choice voting, which I'm going to write RCV. Ranked choice voting. It has other names. Actually, mathematicians don't like this name for reasons which I'll say in a moment, but I'll say this is also known as, sometimes this is called the instant runoff system, or sometimes this is called the transferable vote system. And I'll say why each of those names are used. The idea here is it's kind of like plurality, but it's also meant to consider the second choice and the third choice. So it doesn't just totally ignore the other rankings. It considers the other rankings in a very specific way. Maybe I'll just say before we do an example, this is used as the default method in Australia and Ireland. And it's used for the United States Congress elections. In some states, in the state of Maine and the state of Alaska, they use ranked choice voting for their statewide elections for the Congress and the Senate. Alaska was just recently approved, I think in late 2020, they decided to switch to ranked choice voting in Alaska, and it's a big deal. People care about it. It's used locally, like I believe the big political elections in the city of New York, in New York City, they use ranked choice voting for their elections. Anyway, here's the idea. I will tell you how to do it. You do rounds. You don't actually get the people to vote again. You do all of these rounds sort of mathematically in your head, or you write them down. But in each round, you count up the first place rankings. And you eliminate the one with the fewest votes. This is how you do the instant runoff. And then you just keep on doing round after round until everybody's eliminated, and then you end up with a single winner. All right? You do rounds, but like I said, you don't actually make the people vote again. Because everybody put all of their preferences, you can do all of this sort of on paper, mathematically. This in the real world is done on a computer. That's why it's called the instant runoff. Runoff means you rerun the election with fewer candidates. If the first election was really close, you run it again. That's a runoff. This is called the instant runoff because you are kind of simulating what if we did a bunch of rounds here without actually asking people to vote again. All right, anyway, let's see if I can do an example here. We got plenty of time. How about this? I'm going to write down a big example here. Let's say 38 people say A, B, C, D. 15 people say B, C, A, D. Whoa. 15 say B, C, D, A. 7 say D, C, B, A. Sorry, this is kind of long-winded. I wanted to do an interesting example. 10 people say C, B, A, D. And finally, 15 say C, B, D, A. All right. And I want to decide the winner using ranked choice voting. So, like I said, we do this in rounds, and in each round, you count up the number of times that each person is ranked in the first position. So, round 1, fight. I go A, B, C, D. Those are my candidates, and I have to count up just as I would if I was using the plurality system. Although this is not the end. In the plurality system, you just do one round and that's it. I count A on top is 38 times, right? Just the first column here. B, I got 15 here and another 15 here. That's 30. So B has 30 votes in the top position. What do you say for C? Yeah, it looks like 25 for C, because I got 10 here and a 15 here. And D, 7. All right? Those are the results in round 1. Remember what I said, the rule for doing this ranked choice voting? In each round, you count the first place rankings, eliminate the one with the fewest votes. So, in this case, D is eliminated, because D had only 7 votes, all right? You can see here, actually, can I say parenthetically, I guess A wins the plurality. If you did this election with plurality, then A would have been the winner, because this is exactly, this is how you would have done it with the plurality. You would have counted up these numbers and just chosen the one with the most. But I'm not doing plurality, I'm doing the ranked choice. So we eliminate D, and then we go to round 2, and we count everything again, but we leave D out. So I'm going to redraw this chart here, eliminating D. So 38 people say A, B, C. I'm just copying the chart here, but I'm going to leave out all the D's because I am eliminating D from the contest. Once you get good at this, you can maybe do this in your head without redrawing the chart every time, but I'm trying to be as clear as possible. Next column, 15 people said B, C, A. Now, I took the D out, right? The next column, 15 people, they will also say B, C, A now, because I removed the D from the third column.
But you move the A up, you don't leave it.
Yeah, that's right, because now that the D is gone, we have only 3 candidates left. So sometimes people are going to get bumped up just because D left. Great. This column, 7 people said D, C, B, A. The D is out. C, B, A is the rankings from that column. You just eliminate the D and shuffle everybody else around accordingly. The next column, 10, it said C, B, A, D. So now it's just C, B, A. And the last column, 15, will now be C, B, A. All right? So D has been eliminated. Any question about how we did that? All right, and now let's count them up again. And you just keep on doing this until you're only left with 2 candidates, and then whoever wins the last round wins the whole thing. So let's count them up again. I go A, B, C. A now still has only 38 on top, right? B is on top. Both of these columns, that would be 30. And C gets the others. 7 and 10 and 15. 32, right? And so, in the second round, we eliminate B. Because B has the least in this round. All right? We're not done yet, but let me just say... another bit of terminology. I said sometimes this system is called the transferable vote system. I just want to tell you where that idea comes from. If you look at these people who voted for D up top, D lost big time, right? You might imagine this in this election. Apparently D was some kind of far outsider. D lost in the first round. Those people's votes were shuffled up, and in the next round, their second choice counted as their vote. All right. So the way that this works, and people like this system for this reason. You can vote for an outsider if you want to as your first choice. Even if you know they're going to lose, you can vote for them as your first choice. They will lose in the first round, and then your vote automatically counts for your second choice in the next round. And so there's no such thing as like wasting your vote on an outsider in this system, because even if you vote for an outsider and they lose in the first round, your vote is still going to count for the next choice that you put. Yeah.
Why would you vote for someone like what is that?
Why would you vote for an outsider?
Yeah.
Well,
You know they're not coming.
you could ask those people who voted for Nader. I mean, I personally, when I vote for the president, I don't vote for an outsider. But some people feel like there's some kind of moral, some people who really hate the Democrats and the Republicans, and they're like, I'm never going to vote for one of those crooks. I'm going to vote for Nader or whatever, as kind of it's like a moral issue or a statement or something. Enough people feel that way that they screwed Gore out of becoming the president. So there are people who feel this way.
I would call it a protest vote.
Yeah. Some people call that a protest vote. Yeah. But anyway, what I'm saying is, in the ranked choice system, you don't have to worry about that. You can vote for a loser up front, and even if they lose, even if you know they're going to lose, your vote is still going to count for your next best choice. Okay, let's finish. That's why this is sometimes called, I said, transferable vote. That's the idea behind that language. Your vote, if you vote for a loser, your vote is going to get transferred to the next person. Okay, and let's just do the last round here. So, round 3. I eliminate B. Now all that's left are A's and C's. So I have 38 AC, 15 CA, 15 CA. I'm just copying the same chart again, but without the B's in it. 7 CA, 10 CA, and 15 CA. And this time, when we count them up, A has only 38 again, and C now, if you add those up, 45, 55, 62. And so C is the winner. All right? This is how the ranked choice system works. In this particular example, remember I said A was the winner if you use plurality, but if you use the ranked choice, then C is the winner. All right. I was hoping I'd have enough time to talk about this one example, but a little something to look forward to. There was an interesting example of ranked choice voting just like last week. I don't know if you heard about this, but in Alaska, remember Sarah Palin? I don't know if you remember her. She was the vice presidential candidate for John McCain, which was the Obama's first opponent. Obama and Biden were running against McCain and Palin. And she has, at that time, she was the governor of Alaska, and she at that time was regarded as kind of an outsider, but that was part of McCain's brand, was like McCain was sort of an outsider too, and he went with Palin. Since then, Palin has kind of turned into a sort of MAGA Trump election denier kind of Republican. She goes on Fox News a lot. This is the kind of candidate that she is. Anyway, she ran, and they used ranked choice voting. And, well, you can look it up. We'll talk about that when we come back. Sarah Palin lost. This is not it's not super important because they were running, they just had the election last week. Elections usually are in November, but they just did it because somebody died and they had to fill the spot. So the person who won is only going to be there until November anyway, and then they're going to, like Sarah Palin is just going to run again in a couple months. But looks like you're all ready to go. I guess we can go now then. Thank you for comment. Hope you have a great weekend.